My name is Julian Cross, and I'm the man who broke the world. I was hired to hunt a rogue priest, but I uncovered a truth more monstrous than any demon. The Vatican doesn't banish our ghosts, they harvest them. I set them free to get justice for my mentor, but in doing so, I shattered the cage that held back a much older darkness. Gravity is a suggestion in Rome, a polite request the city's ancient bones often choose to ignore, but I'd never seen it defied with such contemptuous ease, not like this. My boots skidded on terracotta tiles slick with evening mist, the dome of St. Peter's a silent, monolithic witness in the distance. Below, the labyrinthine streets hummed with the oblivious pulse of nightlife. Up here, on the rooftops, there was only the frantic rhythm of my own breathing and the impossible spectacle ahead of me. Father Matthias Corbin. He was 70 years old, a man whose Vatican file listed him as having a weak heart and arthritis in both knees. The man I was chasing, however, was a nightmare puppet. He didn't run. He scrambled and vaulted, his limbs jerking at violent, unnatural angles. Each time he landed after leaping a gap between buildings that would have made an Olympian balk, his body would snap into place with the sickening jerk of a marionette whose strings had been pulled too tight. He was a heresy in motion, a chunk of weathered stone, the size of a human head, tore through the air past my ear. It wasn't just thrown. I'd seen him rip it from a centuries-old chimney with one hand, the mortar crumbling like dry cake. The strength was obscene, a violation of everything I knew about biology and faith. "He's making a mess of the Piazza Navona approach, Julian," a voice crackled in my ear, tinny with static. "Intercept route is a no-go. He just cleared the gap above the Via del Governo Vecchio. Repeat, that's a 20-foot clear." "I see it, Elias," I grunted, forcing my burning legs to pump harder. "Just try to keep civilians clear." Elias Kane, my partner, the cynical, seen-it-all anchor in my world of escalating madness. He was the professional, the man who treated every paranormal event with the weary detachment of a plumber fixing a leaky faucet. But I could hear the strain in his voice. Even he had never seen anything like Corbin. The Vatican had hired me, of course. Their checks were always good, their instructions always vague. "An internal matter," Cardinal Ilario had said, his face a mask of pious concern. "A beloved priest has fallen into a spiritual sickness. Retrieve him, quietly." But this wasn't about their gold or their quiet corrections. This was personal. The file on Father Corbin was thick, but the most important detail was a single notation on the last page. He was the last man known to have spoken with my mentor, Father Michael, before Michael became the first of the 3 exorcists to vanish without a trace. This wasn't a job. It was a vendetta carved from 2 years of silence and dead ends. Corbin was the first thread I'd been able to grab, and I would follow it down into hell itself if I had to. I rounded a large, ornate cupola, using its stone base for cover as another volley of rubble smashed against it. For a moment, we were locked in a strange tableau. Corbin was perched on the edge of a rooftop across the alley, his black cassock torn and flapping in the wind. He wasn't panting. He wasn't afraid. His face, illuminated by the city's glow, was a mask of cold purpose, and his eyes, God, his eyes. There was no panic in them, none of the wild frenzy of a man possessed. There was only a chilling, focused intelligence. It felt ancient and predatory, like something was peering out from behind his irises, assessing me with an intelligence that had nothing to do with the frail priest it was wearing. Then, with a final disdainful look, he dropped. He didn't fall. He simply stepped off the ledge and vanished into the teeming river of tourists and locals in the street below. I cursed and scrambled to the edge, my heart hammering. He was gone, swallowed by the crowd. "Lost him," I said into my calm. "He went to ground level, somewhere west of the piazza." "No visual," Elias confirmed. "What's the plan?" I didn't answer right away. I was replaying that look, that cold, analytical stare. This wasn't chaos. This was calculated. A performance. He'd led me on this chase for a reason. But what? My eyes scanned the streets, my investigator's mind kicking back in, pushing past the adrenaline. I looked for disruption, a pocket of unnatural movement in the flow of the crowd. Nothing. He was too good. But he'd left a trail, not of footprints, but of intent. The chase hadn't been random. It had been a path leading away from the Vatican and into the city's secular heart. Then I saw it. A dark, narrow alleyway tucked between a bustling trattoria and a high-fashion boutique. It was the only place that felt dead, a void in the city's vibrant tapestry. And at its end, a single flickering gas lamp illuminated a grimy window. The faded, peeling gold leaf on the glass read, Antiquita religiosa. Religious antiques. It was a perfect, sickening irony. A cold certainty settled in my gut. He was in there. Elias, I've got a location, I said, my voice low. An antique shop on Via della Pace. Stay put, seal the area, but do not approach. Julian, wait for backup. The auditors are 10 minutes out. The auditors. The Vatican's sterile, black-suited cleaners. They would sanitize the scene, bury the truth, and file Corbin away in some subterranean cell, taking my only lead with him. No, I said, my hand already on the grip of my Sig Sauer. The need was overwhelming, a physical ache in my chest. This was more than a mission. This man, this thing, was the keeper of the mystery that had consumed Michael. He was the answer, the monster, and the key, all in one. This was for Michael. And whatever was waiting inside, I would face it alone. The bell above the door didn't jingle. It made a dull wooden thud, as if muffled by a century of dust. I pushed my way inside, and the warmth of the Roman night was instantly stripped from my skin. It was a sepulchral cold, a deep, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with a profound absence of life. The air was a foul cocktail, the sharp, sterile scent of ozone layered over the thick, sweetish smell of old blood. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste of desecration. This was no ordinary antique shop. It was a charnel house for faith. Shelves overflowed with tarnished silver reliquaries and headless cherubs. Rosaries lay in tangled, broken heaps like nests of dead snakes. But it was the statues that held my gaze, that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Life-size figures of saints, carved from wood and stone, lined the walls. Their faces weren't just chipped or faded by time. They had been deliberately, violently erased, leaving behind blank, smooth surfaces where features should have been. And from the empty sockets of their eyes they wept. A black, viscous fluid oozed down their stone cheeks, thick as tar. Where it dripped onto the floorboards, it sizzled, leaving behind scorched, hissing pits that smoked with a faint, acrid vapor. My hand tightened on my weapon as I moved deeper into the shop, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The cold intensified, the silence broken only by that terrible, quiet hissing. I found him in the back room, a cramped space cluttered with the bones of the church, dismantled confessionals, broken crucifixes, and stacks of hymnals with their pages ripped out. Father Corbin was slumped in a heavy oak chair, a puppet with its strings finely cut. The terrifying agility was gone, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhaustion. His head was bowed, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. As I drew closer, I saw what the rooftop chase had hidden. His clerical collar was torn open, and the skin of his neck and forearms was a canvas of brands. But they weren't the static, scarred flesh of a zealot. They writhed. Beneath the translucent, paper-thin skin of his old age, the sigils moved. They were intricate, spiraling patterns of blackened flesh that pulsed with a slow, sickening rhythm, like a nest of black worms squirming just beneath the surface. It was a living corruption, an infestation of pure meaning. He lifted his head, and the focused intelligence in his eyes was still there, but it was clouded now with agony. "You see?" he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "You see what they made us become?" "What? Who made you?" I demanded, keeping my distance. A bitter, broken laugh escaped his lips. The shepherds, the Holy See, they preach of banishment, of casting out demons into the pit. He shook his head, a gesture of profound weariness. It was always a lie, Mr. Cross, the greatest lie of all. He leaned forward, his branded arms trembling as he gripped the sides of his chair. We don't banish them. We can't. We are not banishers. We are prisons. We are vessels. The words hung in the freezing air, nonsensical and horrifying. Vessels for what? Not demons, he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a desperate, pleading intensity. Demons are a simple myth for a simple flock. The truth is far more human and far more monstrous. We contain echoes. He paused, letting me absorb the alien term. When a soul is torn from its body with extreme violence, with profound trauma, it leaves an imprint, a psychic scream of agony and confusion branded onto the fabric of reality. That is an echo. The Vatican has been collecting them for centuries, not to save souls, but to harvest agony. Every exorcism was a retrieval, every priest a living cage. My mind reeled, trying to process the sheer scale of the blasphemy. Michael, my mentor, he hadn't been a soldier of God. He'd been a jailer, his body the prison. Corbin began to cough, a deep, rattling sound. A trickle of the same black fluid I'd seen on the statues leaked from the corner of his mouth. My vessel is failing, he choked out. The seals are breaking. They will know. They're coming to collect what's left. As he spoke the words, the single flickering light bulb overhead didn't just burn out, it imploded with a soft pop. The shop was plunged into an abyssal darkness. But it was the silence that was worse. The constant, low hiss of the weeping statues, the hum of the city outside, even the sound of my own frantic pulse, it was all gone, swallowed by an oppressive, absolute vacuum. Then they appeared. 3 figures, materializing in the doorway to the main shop. They were framed by the faint glow from the street, but their forms were perfect silhouettes. Their faces were not shadowed. They were voids. Perfect vacuums in the shape of a human head, absorbing all light, all detail, all hope. They carried cases. Not briefcases, but something more organic, more sinister. They were constructed from a gleaming, colorless substance polished to a liquid-like sheen, fused with sections of yellowed, ancient bone. The geometry was all wrong, both futuristic and archaic. And from within them came a low, sickening thrum, a vibration that resonated, not in my ears, but in the fillings of my teeth, a hum of contained power and immense suffering. The auditors had arrived. The 3 void-faced figures advanced as one, their movements a synchronized, gliding horror. There was no sound, no shuffle of feet on the floorboards, only their silent, inexorable approach. My blood ran cold, my every instinct screaming to either fight or flee, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Suddenly Corbin lunged forward, not with the unnatural agility from the rooftops, but with the last, desperate burst of a dying man. He shoved 2 objects into my chest with surprising force. My hands came up automatically to catch them. A heavy, leather-bound codex, its cover worn smooth with age, and a surprisingly modern digital camera, its lens like a single, unblinking eye. The proof, Corbin rasped, his voice a death rattle. Their damnation is in the proof. Run! He pointed a trembling, branded finger toward a pile of rotting tapestries and broken statuary in the corner of the back room. As the auditors raised their grotesque cases, their intention clear, I didn't wait to see what would happen. I turned and scrambled over the debris, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Behind the junk was a section of the wall where the stone was darker, damper. A low archway, barely shoulder width, yawned into blackness. Without a second thought, I plunged through it, the codex clutched tight in one hand, the camera in the other. The oppressive silence of the shop was replaced by a sudden, echoing drip and the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like rot and forgotten history. I was in a subterranean passage, a tunnel carved from the living rock beneath Rome. The walls were slick with moisture and seemed to shift in the periphery of my vision, contracting and expanding in a slow, rhythmic pulse, as if I were running through the esophagus of some great, sleeping beast. I risked a glance at my phone's flashlight, its beam cutting a weak swath through the gloom. The stone was covered in the same kinds of writhing sigils I'd seen on Corbin's skin, but here they pulsed with a faint, nauseating yellow-white light, their glow waxing and waning with the breathing of the walls. This was a place that sanity had abandoned. The geometry of the labyrinth was a lie. I ran down a long, straight corridor that inexplicably twisted back, bringing me to a junction I was certain I had passed minutes before. A staircase descended into the floor at an impossible angle, its steps uneven and treacherous. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing in on me. This wasn't just a physical space, it was a psychic trap designed to break the mind. Then, a burst of static in my ear. Julian, can you read me?" It was Elias. Relief washed over me, a fragile anchor in the madness. "Elias! I'm in some kind of tunnel system under the shop. It's a maze. Corbin, he didn't make it." "I know. I saw them," his voice replied, sounding strained but clear. "The auditors. Listen to me. I'm tracking your signal. There's a passage branching to your left, about 20 feet ahead. Take it. It should lead to a larger chamber." I pushed onward, my light dancing over the pulsing walls. The passage was there, just as he'd said. I ducked into it, my hope surging. But it was a dead end. A solid wall of cold, unyielding stone. "Elias, it's a dead end," I said, my frustration mounting. "You sure about those readings?" The voice that answered was different. It was still Elias, but distorted now, a low whisper that seemed to come from inside my own head. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Julian? You always choose the wrong path." I froze, ripping the earpiece out. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't Elias. Not my Elias. The labyrinth was talking to me, wearing my partner's voice like a mask. The whispers continued, even without the calm, echoing softly in the tight space, preying on my fears. "Michael knew. He knew what you were. That's why he went where you couldn't follow." "Shut up," I muttered, backing away from the dead end, fighting to keep the panic from swallowing me whole. I had to trust my own instincts. I ran, ignoring the phantom directions, the false promises whispered on the edge of hearing. I took turns at random, guided by nothing but a desperate hope, until I burst into a small, circular chamber. And there he was. Elias. The real Elias, looking pale and grim, his own firearm drawn. "Julian," he exclaimed, his relief palpable. "My comms went dead. I found another way in, a service hatch in the alley. What the hell is this place?" "A tomb," I breathed, moving toward him. "The auditors were here." "I know," he said, shaking his head, "but when I got in, the shop above was empty, completely cleared out. No Corbin, no auditors, no weeping statues, just a dusty, vacant storefront. It's like it was never there." A new, more profound horror dawned on me. "The entrance," I said, turning and rushing back the way I'd come, Elias close behind me. "The archway I came through." We reached the spot where I had entered the labyrinth. There was no archway, there was no passage. There was only a solid, seamless wall of ancient, weeping stone, indistinguishable from the rest of the tunnel. I ran my hands over it, feeling for a crack, a seam, a hint of the door that had been there only minutes ago. There was nothing. It was as if it had never existed. We were sealed in, trapped in the Vatican's secret, breathing underbelly, with no way out and the ghosts of dead priests whispering in the walls. The labyrinth finally relented, its twisting, breathing passages giving way to a vast circular chamber. The air here was different, still and cold, but charged with a low, silent pressure that felt like standing at the bottom of a deep ocean. The architecture was immense, dwarfing us. The walls were lined with thousands of narrow, recessed niches, each one dark and empty, rising up into a darkness so complete the ceiling was a matter of faith. In the center of the chamber stood a low, circular dais of polished black stone. "A dead end," Elias grunted, his voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "We find another way out." But it wasn't empty. From the shadows surrounding the dais, a figure emerged. He was a tall man in the simple dark robes of a priest, his face lined with a gentle wisdom, his silver hair neatly combed. He moved with a serene, unnerving grace. "You are not lost, Mr. Cross," the man said, his voice calm and resonant. "You are precisely where you were meant to be." My blood ran cold. I knew that name. "Father Silas?" I whispered, the name a ghost on my lips. He was the second exorcist to have vanished, more than a year ago. "In the flesh, so to speak," Silas replied with a sad smile. Two more figures joined him, stepping into the faint, sourceless light. A stout man in a friar's habit, Brother Leo, and a woman with sharp, intelligent features and wearing the remnants of a lab coat, Dr. Ilara Vance. The third and final missing piece of the puzzle. They all looked perfectly normal, perfectly lucid, perfectly alive. Elias raised his sidearm. "Stay back. Who the hell are you people?" "We are the collection," Dr. Vance said, her voice crisp and academic. "The acquisitions your mentor, Father Michael, helped to curate." The mention of Michael's name hit me like a physical blow. I took a step forward, my mind warring with itself. They looked real. They sounded real. But the whispering labyrinth and Corbin's dying words had poisoned my certainty. I blinked, my eyes stinging from the dry, cold air. And in that instant, the illusion shattered. For a single, nightmarish heartbeat, I saw them as they truly were. Father Silas turned his head slightly, and the back of his skull was simply gone, revealing a concave hollow of pure, pulsing blackness that seemed to drink the light around it. Brother Leo, who had raised a hand in a gesture of peace, was suddenly a horror of geometry, his arms snapping backward at the elbow and wrist, his limbs twisted at angles no living bone could endure. And Dr. Vance, her calm, analytical face collapsed into a silent, eternal scream, her mouth stretched impossibly wide, her eyes black pits of unending terror from the moment of her own violent end. I flinched back, gasping, and they were normal again. Three calm, composed figures watching me with an unnerving sympathy. Elias shot me a look. "Julian, you okay?" He hadn't seen it. It was a blink-and-you-miss-it glitch in reality, a glimpse beneath the veil. "We apologize if our true state is jarring," Silas said, his gaze fixed on me. He knew what I'd seen. "The projection takes a great deal of focus to maintain, but we needed you to see, to understand the truth of this place." "This is the Vatican's deepest secret," Brother Leo added, his voice a low rumble. "Not a prison. This is the archives of agony." He gestured to the thousands of dark niches lining the walls. "The Church taught us that exorcism was a sacred duty, a battle for a single soul. It was a lie. They discovered that an echo formed in a moment of extreme, violent suffering was more potent, more stable, clearer. The trauma wasn't a side effect, it was the desired ingredient." My stomach churned. They were harvesting pain. "Precisely," Dr. Vance confirmed, her professional tone making the horror even more profound. "They treated human suffering like a vineyard, a good year, a bad year. A vintage agony. Each one of us," she indicated herself and the two priests, "was a tool, a specialized net to go out and retrieve the most unique and potent echoes from the moments of their creation. We were the librarians of borrowed trauma." I finally found my voice. "And Michael?" A flicker of genuine sadness crossed Father Silas's face. "Michael was the best of us, the most empathetic. It made him a masterful vessel, able to contain more than any other. But his compassion was a flaw they couldn't abide. He learned the truth. And he tried to burn their library to the ground." Dr. Vance stepped forward, her expression turning graver still. "But the library holds more than just human souls, Mr. Cross. The Vatican's net was wide. Over the centuries, it sometimes caught other things, things that were never human. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Ancient consciousnesses. Beings that exist as pure pattern, pure thought. They were caught in the crossfire, accidentally snagged by the psychic trauma of a human death they happened to be near. Those were the echoes the Vatican truly feared. They weren't catalogued. They were hidden, buried under layers of lesser agonies. They weren't afraid of ghosts, Mr. Cross. They were afraid of what was hiding among them. "We are not a library anymore," Silas said, his voice taking on a new, hard edge. He looked from me to Elias, and then to the codex in my hand. "We are an arsenal. And we are about to arm the world against its shepherds." "This archive is not just a prison," Father Silas declared, his voice resonating with a chilling authority that his placid projection belied. "It is a network, a web of contained consciousness, linked and suppressed by the very architecture of this chamber. And we are going to overload it," Dr. Vance stated, her tone as sharp and precise as a scalpel. She gestured to the shadows behind them. Elias and I watched, stunned, as 3 more of those hideous cases slid from recessed niches in the wall. They were identical to the ones the auditors had carried, containers of some polished, obsidian-like substance fused with lattices of yellowed bone, each one humming with a barely contained chorus of torment. "Those aren't for extraction," I realized aloud, the monstrous truth clicking into place. "They're mobile containment, prisons." "Prisons for the masses," Brother Leo rumbled. "Each one holds hundreds of echoes, compressed and contained. The ones the Vatican deemed too common, too weak to warrant a dedicated priestly vessel." The scale of their collection was staggering. This wasn't a library. It was a psychic landfill. "They've refined their methods since our time," Dr. Vance continued, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "Why wait for tragedy to strike when you can create it? The Vatican has moved from harvesting to farming. They are now engineering mass casualty events, a train derailment here, a structural collapse there." My stomach nodded. "To create new echoes." "Powerful new ones," she affirmed. "They target specific individuals, scientists, political dissidents, artists, for the knowledge they possess, and simply harvest the ambient trauma from the collateral damage as a bonus. They are building a new, more potent generation of echoes, and we are going to set the old ones free to stop them." Their plan was an act of cataclysmic spiritual warfare, and they were drafting me as their soldier. "We cannot initiate the final sequence," Silas explained, his translucent form flickering for a moment. "Our very nature is too intertwined with the system. We are part of the network we seek to destroy. But you, Mr. Cross, a living soul, untainted by their brand, you can complete the circuit." He pointed to the central dais, where a single, final container, the one I had seen Corbin holding just before the end, now rested. It was smaller than the others, more ornate, its bony latticework forming a cage around a core of swirling, captured darkness. "Place the camera on the dais. Its lens will be the focusing point, its recording, the testament." My heart hammered. This was it, the point of no return. I looked at Elias, whose face was a mixture of terror and grim resolve. He gave me a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. There was no other way. I walked to the dais, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I placed the camera down, its small lens aimed at the ceiling. The air grew thick, the pressure building until my ears popped. Then, the chamber was filled with a soundless vibration. The release began. It wasn't light or sound, it was a wave of pure psychic force, a silent scream that had no sound but tore through the mind. It felt like a physical blow, a pressure wave of pure, unfiltered emotion, grief, terror, rage, and a loneliness so profound it threatened to extinguish my own consciousness. A shearing sensation ripped behind my eyes, and for a moment I felt 1,000 lifetimes of agony flood my own mind. The snap of a neck, the heat of a fire, the shock of a blade. Just as the psychic shockwave peaked, the main entrance to the chamber exploded inward in a shower of stone and dust. A dozen black-clad Vatican security forces stormed in, their faces grim behind protective visors, their composite rifles raised. They were hit first. The wave of silent agony washed over them, and they crumpled as if their strings had been cut. Their professional discipline evaporated in an instant. One man dropped his rifle and began clawing at his own eyes, howling in voiceless terror. Another turned on his closest comrade, his face a mask of sudden, violent madness. They fell upon each other in a writhing heap of suicidal, homicidal insanity, their own agony now adding a fresh, raw note to the choir. I stumbled back, raising the camera I'd snatched from the dais, needing the filter of its small screen to process the horror. Through the lens, I saw them, pouring from the niches, from the containers, from the very stone of the walls, a torrent of horrors. They were not peaceful souls set free. They were distorted, screaming shapes, each one trailing the ethereal specter of its own violent death. A woman wreathed in spectral flames, a man with the ghostly image of a noose around his neck, a child clutching the wound in its chest. Their silent screams contorted the very air, making the light bend and the shadows writhe. It was a geyser of concentrated human misery, a river of forgotten souls ascending from the depths out of the archives and into the unsuspecting world. They were free, and we had just handed them the key. We scrambled out of a forgotten service aqueduct and emerged into chaos. The Rome I knew, a city of golden light, humming traffic, and laughing tourists, was gone. In its place was a nightmare, painted in strokes of crimson. The sky was not dark, but bathed in a hellish, pulsating red glow that seemed to emanate from no source and yet from everywhere at once. It cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed as if they had lives of their own. The air thrummed with a low, sub-audible frequency that vibrated deep in my bones, a city-wide panic attack made manifest. People were screaming, running blindly through the streets, their faces masks of raw terror. They weren't running from anything tangible. They were fleeing the horrors now blooming inside their own minds. We pushed through the panicked crowds, our own dread a cold, hard knot in our stomachs. Elias and I didn't speak. There were no words for what we had done, for the pandemonium we had unleashed. Our safe house was a nondescript apartment near Trastevere, a place of sterile anonymity chosen for moments just like this. We barricaded the door and I immediately went to work, hooking the camera and the codecs up to a secured laptop. The proof. Corbin's dying wish. It felt so hollow now, a pathetic gesture in the face of the apocalypse we had initiated. As the files began their slow, encrypted upload to my network of journalistic contacts, Elias stared out the window at the pulsating, blood-red world. "This is more than we bargained for, Julian," he said, his voice flat. "It's what they wanted," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "The dead priests, this was their plan. Their plan feels a lot like the end of the world." I opened the heavy codex Silas had given me. It wasn't a Bible or a book of rituals. It was a ledger, page after page of names, written in elegant, archaic script. But it wasn't a list of echoes. It was something far more sinister. At the top of the last page, the heading read, "Liquidation Schedule, authorized by the Office of the Cardinal Auditor." It was a kill list, and near the bottom I found our names. Julian Cross, acute cardiac arrest, 11:47. Location Hotel Raphael Rooftop, no witnesses. My blood ran cold. I scanned the line below. Elias Kane, cerebral hemorrhage, 8:14, witnessed by wife. The details were chillingly specific, clinical, and precise. They didn't just plan to kill us. They had scheduled our deaths down to the minute. A bureaucratic termination order. I showed it to Elias. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pallor that matched the city's sick glow. He was supposed to be dead hours from now, his wife the sole witness to his sudden, inexplicable demise. As if summoned by the thought, a burner phone I kept for Vatican contacts began to ring, its shrill tone cutting through the tense silence. I hesitated for a second before answering, putting it on speaker. "Mr. Cross," a voice said. It was smooth, cold, and utterly authoritative. I recognized it instantly, not as the frantic, possessed priest from the rooftops, but as the man from the file, the man in the photographs with popes and presidents. "Corbin," I breathed. "Cardinal Corbin," he corrected, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm afraid our mutual acquaintance, Father Matthias, is no longer with us. A tragic loss. There was no trace of the puppet. Only the puppet master remained." "I see you've been busy. A commendable effort, really. You've managed to do in one night what our enemies have failed to do for centuries." "We have the proof, Corbin. It's all going public." A dry chuckle crackled over the line. "Proof of what? That the Church has been containing a force that would otherwise tear humanity apart? That we have been acting as the silent, unthanked guardians against a darkness you cannot possibly comprehend? Yes, you have proof of our methods, but not our purpose. You see our work as monstrous, but we see it as a necessary evil, a quarantine for the soul of mankind." The arrogance was staggering. He was framing their systematic torture and harvesting of human souls as a noble sacrifice. "You've made a terrible mistake, Mr. Cross," Corbin's voice dropped, losing its condescending edge and taking on the chilling finality of a curse. "You think you've freed tormented souls. You haven't. You've just shattered the cages of things that should never, ever be named. Things we kept buried beneath layers of lesser human agonies." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Those echoes you unleashed? They weren't just prisoners. They were our watchdogs. Their pain was a constant psychic scream, a warning siren that kept the older darkness at bay. Now that darkness is free to stir. And the watchdogs? You've made them rabid. You haven't saved the world, Mr. Cross. You have just doomed us all." He hung up. The line went dead, leaving only the sound of a city tearing itself apart outside our window, and the chilling certainty that we hadn't opened a door for the ghosts. We had torn the hinges off a cage that held something far, far worse. The world woke up screaming. The initial wave of psychic terror had subsided, replaced by a more insidious and targeted form of chaos. The evidence we'd uploaded had gone viral, but it was being drowned out by news reports that were stranger than any conspiracy. The echoes weren't just haunting the world, they were exacting a terrible, poetic vengeance. It wasn't simple killing, it was grotesque, symbolic justice. In Zurich, a high-ranking Vatican banker responsible for laundering billions was found in his vault, his body perfectly preserved but mummified, his mouth stuffed with shredded worthless currency. In Paris, a prominent media figure who had spent decades spinning Vatican propaganda was discovered in his studio, his tongue turned to solid, gray stone. In Brazil, an industrialist who had profited from a factory collapse engineered by the Church was found fused into the cooling concrete of his newest construction site. The body horror was global, imaginative, and deeply personal. The dead were not just angry, they were artists of retribution. We were on the run. The liquidation schedule in Corbin's codex was no idle threat. We abandoned the safe house, moving through the shell-shocked city like ghosts ourselves. We found a room in a cheap hotel near the Termini station, the kind of transient place that didn't ask questions. The air still thrummed with that low, agitating frequency, and the sky remained a bruised, unhealthy shade of purple-red. "We need to get out of the city," Elias said, peering through the grimy window. "Out of the country." "And go where?" I countered. "This is everywhere, Elias. We just saw a news report from Tokyo. They're seeing it too." As I spoke, a sudden, violent banging erupted at our door. "Vatican police, open up!" "Auditors," Elias hissed, drawing his sidearm. "They had found us." We didn't hesitate. I shattered the window with the chair, and we scrambled out onto a rusty fire escape. Below us, the alley was a chasm of shadow. As we clambered down the rickety stairs, something happened that was more terrifying than any phantom. Elias, who was a few steps ahead of me, began to glitch. His voice, yelling a warning, stuttered into a garbled, looping syllable. "J, Julian, move!" For a split second, his hand on the railing became translucent. The grimy surface of the fire escape visible through his skin. Then he was solid again, turning to me with a confused look, as if he hadn't noticed a thing. At that exact moment, the burner phone in my pocket rang again. I fumbled for it, my heart seizing with a new, specific kind of dread. The caller ID was blank, I answered. "Julian? Thank God. They found us, but I got out." "I'm in an alley off Via Cavour. Where are you?" The voice was Elias. It was his voice precisely, not distorted, not whispered, but perfectly clear and stable, filled with the urgent panic of our situation. My head spun. I was looking at Elias right in front of me, his face pale and solid, and I was listening to Elias on the phone, his voice a perfect replica. The line between the living and the echoes was not just blurring, it was fraying, tangling, overriding itself. A crippling paranoia seized me. Was the man descending the fire escape in front of me even real, or was he a phantom, a copy? "Julian, what are you waiting for?" the Elias in front of me yelled, snapping me out of my trance. The auditors were on the fire escape above, their void faces turning toward us. I pocketed the phone and followed, my mind racing. We hit the alley floor and ran. As we burst out onto the main street, we stumbled directly into a war zone. The auditors, 5 of them now, were moving to intercept us, their strange bone and sheen cases held ready. But they weren't expecting resistance. Not like this. From the very cobblestones of Rome, the echoes rose to meet them. They were ancient, their rage honed over millennia. Skeletal Roman legionaries with spectral pilums, their empty sockets burning with cold light. Ghostly crusaders in tattered surcoats, their phantom blades dripping with ethereal hatred. They swarmed the auditors, a tide of vengeful history. The advanced Vatican technology was useless. The auditors fired their weapons, beams of focused energy that passed harmlessly through the phantoms. The echoes, however, were not bound by physics. They were beings of pure, traumatic memory, fueled by centuries of rage. A legionary's spectral gladius sliced through an auditor's arm, not cutting it, but causing it to de-resolve into a cloud of screaming, static-like particles. The crusaders descended on another, their incorporeal forms passing through the auditor's body, leaving it a collapsed, empty shell of black clothing. It was a slaughter. We stood frozen, watching the Vatican's secret police being torn apart by the very history their organization had sought to cage and control. The ghosts of the empire were reclaiming their city, and we were trapped in the middle of their ancient, bloody war. The world was breaking. We drove through a countryside that was just as sick as the city, under a sky the color of a day-old bruise. The Codex, our only guide, contained a final entry, not a name on the liquidation list, but a location. A remote monastery nestled deep in the Apennine Mountains, marked with a single, cryptic symbol, a circle eating its own tail. It was our last, desperate hope for answers. The monastery was ancient, a fortress of faith carved into the side of a mountain, seemingly untouched by the chaos gripping the world. But as we approached, a profound sense of wrongness settled over me. There were no guards, no Vatican forces. The silence was absolute. We found the main chapel doors open, swinging gently in the cold mountain wind. Inside, we were not met by loyalists or auditors. The chapel was filled with monks in simple, gray habits, their faces cowled in shadow. They stood in silent, contemplative rows, their stillness more unnerving than any threat. As we stepped onto the stone floor, they turned in unison, and I saw their faces. They were translucent, flickering at the edges like faulty projections. They were all echoes, the spirits of dead exorcists. One figure stepped forward, his projection more stable, more solid than the others. He was young, with a face that radiated a terrifying, beatific calm. His eyes held an ancient, patient wisdom that did not belong in a man who looked no older than 30. "Mr. Cross, Mr. Kane, we were expecting you," he said, his voice a serene and melodic whisper that filled the cavernous space. "You have done well. The first phase is complete." "Who are you?" Elias demanded, his voice tight. "What is this?" "We are the faithful who saw the true path," the monk replied, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "We are not allies in your fight for freedom. We are architects. We have been orchestrating this from the beginning, from long before Father Michael ever uncovered the truth." My mind struggled to grasp his meaning. You wanted this? This chaos? "Chaos is merely a prelude to order," he said, his calm unwavering. "You see this as liberation, an act of justice for the dead. You are mistaken. We do not want freedom for the echoes. We want reintegration." The word hung in the cold air, pregnant with a new kind of horror. "A soul is a pattern of energy," the monk explained, his tone that of a patient teacher. "Life is the vessel that contains it. When a vessel is broken, should the soul be condemned to an eternity of screaming into the void? Or does it have the right to find a new home, to reclaim what was stolen from it?" He gestured to the assembled spirits. "We believe the echoes have the right to live again, to overwrite the souls of the living, to reclaim a world that has forgotten them." The global release, the silent scream, the vengeful harvest, it wasn't an act of liberation. It was the first shot in a war. They hadn't opened a prison. They had unleashed an invading army upon an unsuspecting populace. They had created the perfect conditions for their conquest, using us, using the Vatican's own monstrous system, as their unwitting weapon. "The pain you unleashed," the serene monk continued, "the psychic trauma now blanketing the globe, it has weakened the barrier, thinned the veil between what is and what once was. It has made reality porous." As he spoke, he raised his hands. In the center of the chapel, the floor began to glow, the same writhing sigils from the labyrinth burning themselves into the stone. A low, resonant hum started, growing in intensity, a frequency I could feel vibrating in my teeth. It was a global device, an amplifier. He was locking in the change, turning a temporary state of chaos into a permanent new reality. A world where anyone, at any moment, could be replaced, their consciousness snuffed out and overwritten by a centuries-old, traumatized and vengeful entity. "The age of man, with its brief, fleeting lives, is over," the monk declared, his voice rising in triumph. "A new age begins, the age of ghosts." There was nothing left to do. We turned and fled, the humming sound chasing us from the monastery. We scrambled back to the car, the world outside now feeling fundamentally and irrevocably broken. We were driving away from the epicenter, but there was nowhere to run. The battle was for the soul of humanity, and it would be fought in every home, in every city, inside every living person on Earth. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a sickly yellow light over the mountains. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Beside me, Elias was silent, his face a mask of shock. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw it. For just a split second, a flicker of static seemed to run through his eyes, a momentary distortion in the fabric of his being. He smiled, but it was a thin, unfamiliar expression. "Are you sure," he asked, his voice a perfect imitation of my partner's, "that you're the real one?" My hand, shaking, reached for the only thing I trusted anymore. I raised the camera, the one thing that had seen the truth in the archives. I aimed its cold, impartial lens at the man beside me, my finger hovering over the record button. I didn't know what I would see. A friend? A ghost? A stranger wearing a familiar face? It didn't matter. The age of man was over. The age of ghosts had begun, and I was about to take its first picture.